Somebody sent me an email recently with a link to an article that wasn't so much complaining, but just factually describing the digital nomad scene in Chiang Mai as a scam, as a pyramid scheme specifically, and saying, look, this is a little world of people who quit their jobs in Los Angeles and London and Australia and move to Chiang Mai. And the reality is the only way they can make money is by preying on one another. That new people show up and the old people try to sell them books, try to sell them a dream, try to sell them yoga classes, but try to sell them the illusion they can have a wonderful new life in Chiang Mai. And economically, they really can't. It was an interesting article. I mean, I think it's tremendously important for all of us that we're honest with ourselves and honest with others about where our money comes from, whether we're living in Los Angeles or Chiang Mai, Thailand. It's certainly easy to meet someone and mistake them for being financially self-reliant in Southeast Asia when really they're not. There are certainly a lot of people who are in Chiang Mai who are spending money that they've inherited. And I don't say that with any hatred. I don't say that with any rancor, but it's the truth. And there are other people, and to give you a specific example, I met one Eastern European woman, and she was what you'd call an absentee landlord. She owned an apartment in Eastern Europe, and every month, let's say that apartment gave her $500 in rent. Somebody else was paying rent to stay in that apartment that she owned. And in a place like Cambodia and a place like Thailand, that's a lot of money. So, when I met that woman, this absentee landlord, she did not introduce herself to me as an absentee landlord. She didn't say to me, hi, this is my name. What I do for a living is I live off the rent money of this apartment I own in Europe. No. She introduced herself to me as a chef. And she had some bullshit term. I forget if she called herself a macrobiotic chef or an organic chef or something, whatever, something fancier than just chef. So I went to meet her, and I was assuming she was going to tell me that she's someone who actually had a degree in cuisine and a career linked to cuisine. And I was really expressing, concern for her. I said, well, gee, here in this part of Asia, I don't really see how you can earn enough money to pay your rent in that line of work. And I had known a couple of people, two men stand out in my mind, white European men who actually did work as chefs in East Asia, in restaurants and also in hotels. But in general, none of those places could pay, a Western trained, one of them was a French trained chef, a wage durably. Normally those places would pay for a short period of time for a foreign chef to come in and educate their own staff so that their staff could learn to cook Western style cuisine or improve their skills, so they'd get a couple weeks of work doing training sessions. And then they'd have to move on. So because I'd had that experience before of talking to those guys, when I first met this woman, I was really concerned. I said, oh, well, gee, how do you afford your rent, let alone your next airplane ticket? I wondered. That's not what I said directly, but that was what was on my mind. How do you actually afford your rent, or how do you actually afford your next airplane ticket if you're earning the same wages that a local person would, being, working in the back of a restaurant? And she immediately just sort of dismissed the question and said, oh, well, I have this apartment that I own in Eastern Europe, and so every month I get income from the rent from that apartment, so that's not really a problem for me. Okay, mystery solved, right? That's what it comes down to here. It can be very misleading to people. I think other people might have met her and might have assumed that this was really somebody who was living that dream. This was somebody who was a macrobiotic chef or whatever, someone who was an organic chef. And indeed, she could have had a YouTube channel promoting herself as exactly that to her fans. But in reality, she was at best a hobbyist. She was someone who cooked for fun or cooked in her spare time and did not cook for a living. She wasn't a real pro. And this is part of the internet age we live in, is of amateurs misrepresenting themselves as professionals. Whether it's Ted Carr saying that he's an athlete when he's not an athlete, or someone saying they're an artist when they're not an artist. They don't actually, earn their living through the arts. Across the board, we're living in an era when it's never been easier for an amateur to find an audience, but it's never been more difficult for an amateur to earn a living from that audience. And certainly, Ted Carr himself, by his own account, is a failed author. Being an author, let alone an editor or a book publisher, now it has never been easier to write a book and have that book reach its audience. But it's incredibly difficult to actually earn a living with a pen, to earn a living from writing. And that's true across the board, in fiction, in nonfiction. Even people who are writing for newspapers. Now a ridiculous percentage of the content in newspapers, the authors are not being paid for. So, and we'll come back to that, but the general, reflection I want to share with you here is that it's tremendously important for us to be honest about where our money comes from. Even if it's just the influence we have on other people who see us face to face. And I saw that many, many, many times in Southeast Asia, where people would say to me, like this really happened, people would say to me, but you can earn money. I have a good friend and he lives in a big house. He lives a wealthy, opulent lifestyle. And he just writes articles for the local newspaper. So this would be like in Thailand. This would be writing for the Bangkok Post or something. Or maybe writing for the Phnom Penh Post. And I knew enough of those people, he said, look, you must realize if you write articles for a newspaper in Thailand or a newspaper as a foreigner, not as a locally hired person, you're paid a symbolic wage. You're paid a very small amount of money just to reward you for your time, just to make you feel welcome, just to make you feel valued. But you're not paying your rent with that. You're not buying a car with that. You're not buying a house with that. And the people they were describing, whether it was money that they'd inherited or money from a prior career, like, they used to be an architect in Europe and now they were semi-retired in Thailand and running for the newspaper. It's, in many, many cases, there's this illusion that what people have written on their business card, what people say they do, is where their money really comes from. I don't know if anyone is so naive to believe that someone like Ted Carr can afford to buy multiple airplane tickets back and forth between Hawaii and Canada and Thailand on the basis of him selling motivational ebooks. I doubt it. I do not know if anyone is naive enough to believe the story he now presents that he apparently saved up money as a fresh fruit tycoon, apparently a black market fresh fruit tycoon in Vancouver, Canada. He says that when he was living in Vancouver, he would buy $600 worth of fruit and then sell it on to his friends and clients. So he would buy wholesale and he would sell retail with a 15% markup. And he remarks that 15% on $600 is pretty good money. Well, yes, it would be if you were selling $600 of fruit a day. But that's not what he means. I think he means $600 a month. Is it $600 a week, Ted? I doubt it. That's a lot of mangoes. You got to have a lot of friends to move $600 of fruit every week. And I hate to tell you this, but 15% of $600 is $90. $90 Canadian may be real money in Cambodia. But that's not real money in the city of Vancouver. Vancouver, BC, Canada, the cost of rent is very, very high. The cost of living is very, very high. And I do not think it is credible for Ted Carr to suggest that in just a few short years, or perhaps just 1 year, it seems like a very short period of time, he worked as a part-time personal trainer at a mainstream gym, and he sold crates of fruit out of his garage. And it's his garage, not his parents' garage. So he was paying rent for a house in Vancouver, which is, you can try to do the math. How many crates of mangoes would he have to sell at a 15% markup just to pay the rent for a house that has a garage in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada? That's a lot of mangoes, my friend. That's a lot. And yet we are supposed to imagine that in a brief period of him handling mangoes for his friends, his short career as a fresh fruit tycoon and part-time personal fitness trainer, he saved up the money for him to now live back and forth between Thailand, Hawaii, and the west coast of Canada. That's a very expensive lifestyle. I don't care if he films himself being in a cheap hostel or a cheap apartment he got from Airbnb. That's real money. Okay? And you aren't old enough to be retired, Ted. Now, I think there are a lot of other questions to ask there. There are questions about having ambition. There's questions about the fact that he originally said that he dropped out of university because he wanted to be a writer. Now, maybe in some ways that's a noble ambition. But in fact, what he says now is that he just dropped out of university because he wanted to enjoy his own life and live in the moment. Well, that's very different, isn't it? That has none of the personal sacrifice or commitment to an art or commitment to an audience or commitment to accomplishing anything that maybe becoming a writer has. But the bottom line is, you are really doing a disservice to yourself and others if you lie in this way. If you pretend that you are paying your own way in Chiang Mai, Thailand, or anywhere else by selling buckets of fruit or anything else when you're not. Now, I don't know. I don't need to speculate, but I mean, Ted, could it be that you inherited money you're not mentioning? Could it be that the garage you were selling fruit out of was not your garage, but was your parents' garage? There has to be some more plausible explanation than that you went from, by your own account, working in a hamburger restaurant for $6 an hour to dropping out of college, paying $500 to get a health coach certificate, working as a part-time health coach and selling fruit out of your garage. It does not make sense that you graduated from this career to living as you do now on permanent vacation, back and forth between Hawaii and Thailand by airplane. You can do the math, Ted. It doesn't add up. And I'll just say, this has really been a recurring problem in my life. People around me in Cambodia would say, oh, but you can get a job working for the local newspaper here in Cambodia because you have this background as an editor, an author, and researcher. And you have to say to them, no, the foreign employees they have there, some of them are paying to be there. Some of them are university students, say a master's student from California who is wealthy or on some kind of scholarship, or both, most likely both, where in effect the parents of the employee are paying them to be there in Cambodia working for free. There's a lot of that going on in the humanitarian sector. There's a lot of that going on in creative writing and journalism, where the people who they may hand you a business card that suggests that they're an employee there. But the reality is they're not paying their rent by working at that newspaper or working in that charity. They may have a very impressive sounding job title from that part of the nonprofit sector or creative writing sector, whatever, or the media, whatever it may be. But the reality is their parents in California are still supporting them, or their university in California is still supporting them. It's actually not a viable career for them. It's not a viable career for me, and it's not a viable career for anyone. And sometimes I think a whole sector of the economy can get dragged down by this kind of mismatched set of expectations, where people are selling you a dream. I did want to mention this on my channel, sooner or later, and this is a good time to say it. At my university in Canada, we had a woman come to a creative writing class, and she was presented as a success story, as an author, etc. I mean, she did earn her living by writing books, but when she went over the economic reality of her career, for years and years, she taught English as an E.S.L. teacher, and English as a second language teacher in Hong Kong and in southern China. And at the end of that time, I mean, her youth was gone. She lost the chance to have children or get married or have a family. She was too old to bear kids anymore. And she went back to Canada with nothing. And she moved back into her mom's house. And I was sitting there listening to this lecture, and there was more to it, as I'll say in a second. I was sitting there listening to this lecture, and I was like, how is it possible that this is being held up as a positive example for university students. If anything, this should be presented to university students with the sternest warning imaginable, saying, hey, you might think it's all fun and games after you finish your university degree to go and get a low-paying job in Asia teaching English as a second language. But guess where you can end up when you're 45 years old? Now, anyone else, if this woman who gave the lecture at my university, if she had stayed in Canada and worked a minimum wage job at Tim Hortons, it's a donut shop, or at a Starbucks pays more than minimum wage, by the way. If she had worked a steady minimum wage job in Canada, at the end of that time, she could have owned a home, maybe a very modest apartment, but she could have been making down payments. She could have owned a car, yes, with a line of credit, yes, she could have put together a real life for herself. She could have had a future. And instead, she worked in a sector where fundamentally people are underpaid because they love it. There are I still talk to people I talk to other vegans like that. There are vegans who ask me for advice because I have background in this, living and working in Asia. There are vegans who say, I just love working with kids. And it's true. So they'll work for below minimum wage, below what minimum wage would be in Canada. They'll work against their own financial interests, short-term and long-term. And they may really destroy their own long-term future, partly because they love kids. And partly because this is a whole sector of the economy that's really, how should I say this? It's influenced by young people finishing university and wanting to go to Asia and chase a dream. And chase a dream with, on the one hand, very little sense of economic realism, and on the other hand, with very real financial support from their parents, right? Like part of it just may be that they feel they can come to Asia and teach E.S.L. for a few years and go back to Canada with nothing, go back to America, go back to England, go back to wherever they come from. But let's say it's Canada. And they have the confidence that when they go back to Canada, they'll be able to move into their parents' house again with nothing and then find their footing, find a new job, find a new career. No job should leave you in that position. Okay? If you're going to go work in a coal mine for 5 years, at the end of those 5 years, you should really own something. Whether that's an apartment or a car or whatever, you should have a footing. You should not have to move back into your parents' house. And the whole sector of E.S.L. teaching, on the contrary, it's really based on that pattern of exploiting young people who have all kinds of dreams. I mean, look, you can see this on YouTube. There are so many young people in America now who grow up watching Japanese cartoons, and when they finish the university degree, in their minds there is nothing grander than going to Japan, the magical country that all these cartoons come from, and that's what they want to do. And certainly if you're vegan and you've been spending any time at all on the internet, you're aware there are a lot of vegans of all ages. It's not just young people, because I've met people in their 50s who did this. There are people who are university students through retirement age who want to quit their job or drop out of university and run away to the magical city of Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is a rundown hellhole, by the way. It's an awful city. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And they want to live like Ted Carr. They want the dream that people like Ted Carr and Durian Ryder are selling them. And how are you going to bankroll that dream? Is it going to be by selling ebooks to other people about that dream? I don't think so. Coal mining is a lot more honest than this kind of pyramid scheme where one person after another joins the digital nomad scene. One person after another jumps into this new life and then tries to sell the promise of that new life to others, right? And the reality is the people who are really living those lives either have money they saved up from another job in the past, or an inheritance, or some other arrangement. They own an apartment back in Toronto. Someone else is paying rent on that apartment. And that rent would not be a lot of money in Canada, but maybe it's a lot of money in Cambodia or Thailand. This is what goes on. I think Asia offers a lot of people the appealing illusion of a life of affluence that's completely unearned and completely undeserved. And And I understand completely that, especially when people have just finished university, or maybe they've just lost patience with a job they hate, that may be an especially appealing notion. That you too can live like Ted Carr, or that you can get into any of the sectors I've mentioned in this video and suddenly start earning a living that, I don't know, will provide you with regular access to a swimming pool in a tropical country. But it's a trap. And for me, I think the saddest part of it is that most of the people who are laying the trap don't really profit from it and don't really know that that's what they're doing and that's what's going on. To give a contrasting example that doesn't involve so-called third world conditions or that kind of economic disparity, I spent a lot of time in Cambridge, England, and Oxford, UK. And those cities were full of people who would cling to a Cambridge mailing address, cling to an Oxford mailing address, sometimes with no job at all, or with a job on paper that they could put on their business card to say, hey, officially I'm a researcher at this institute. But the job either paid absolutely nothing or paid an honorarium, paid a merely symbolic sum of money, right? And it was in England, in British culture, it was very, very difficult to get those people to be honest with you. Because they would meet you and they would say, oh, I'm a researcher at the Mackenzie Foundation for anthropological, something really specific. Okay, for the anthropology of the human diet, some of this, or the diet of remote tribal groups. I'm a researcher for this foundation for endangered languages. Something that sounds exciting and interesting. And the reality was that these were people who, very often they had a PhD. Sometimes they had an MA and they were hoping to do a PhD. These were people who were really living, they would be living in absolute poverty. They would be on the dole. They'd be worse than unemployed. But maybe they had some savings from a job they had in the past. Maybe they had an inheritance. Maybe they had parents who still supported them financially. And that was supporting them in living on the cusp of a very wealthy academic institution, and to still be in the loop to find out about what kind of research projects they could apply to get involved in. What grants, what proposals. Maybe someone was putting together a nonprofit project and they could join, or they could at least submit their resume, submit their CV. Just by living there, just by being in the loop. It's a bit like being an unemployed actor and yet wanting to live in Hollywood and be connected to people, have those social connections so you know what opportunities you're missing out on at least. There was a whole world of people there in England, in Cambridge and Oxford. And I think it was just from their own sense of pride that they did not want to be honest about how they were paying the rent. But at the same time, all these people coming together in one place at one time, everyone coming together and for their own reasons being dishonest about it, it actually creates a kind of trap for people on the outside looking in. Because people on the outside looking in really think, oh, hey, if I do the same thing he does, I can afford to pay my rent and live in a nice home in Oxford or a nice home in Cambridge. I can also write books and write research grant proposals, and I can live this same life I see other people living. Because that's what you see. You see them living. You see their business card. You hear their boasting. You know what I mean? And it's a trap. It's a trap even if nobody is intentionally laying the trap. You know what I mean? And I see that same thing here with, the wonder that is Chiang Mai, with all these people really lying one way or another about what the economic opportunities are in Chiang Mai and what the economic costs are of quitting your job, even if you literally just have a job at Starbucks and going to teach English as a second language in Chiang Mai, or going and trying to earn a living on YouTube in Chiang Mai, which is kind of even more ridiculous. Everyone is presenting this illusion of affluence, but on the other hand, they're also just presenting that most fundamental illusion that the job you see on their business card is the job that actually pays their rent.